Thanks for taking your time out, your evening tonight to listen about DEQ's proposed cleanup plan for the Willamette Cove Upland. I'm Erin McDonald with the DEQ cleanup program. I've been on the project about 2 years, and about last summer, as the engineer support, and last summer I transitioned into the project manager role for this project. So a lot of great work was done before I was on the project, but this is a fun phase right now. So hopefully some takeaways from tonight is that DEQ has prepared a proposed cleanup plan for the upland portion of the site. This action is separate from the in-water work that's being done under EPA's Portland Harbor Superfund, and we're currently accepting comments on the proposed plan. Right now it's through the end of June. And at the end we'll talk about how comments can be submitted in multiple ways. Topics today are going to be, what is the cleanup program? Why are we doing a cleanup? We'll expand on a little bit more of the DEQ versus the EPA responsibilities, the current status of the upland work. We'll go into pretty much a summary of the proposed cleanup plan, how to comment, and then what's next, what happens after the public comment period. So the Willamette Cove has a rich history. Industrial activities have spanned pretty much over the 100 years. What you see here is a picture of kind of a peak industrial age in 1934. They were originally 3 different properties. We call them the west parcel, the central parcel, and the east parcel. One was a plywood mill. The central parcel was dry dock activities, and the upland supported that. And then the east parcel was a copperage, which was like a wood rail manufacturing facility. And just a little bit about where this site is on the Willamette River. It's on the northeast bank of the Willamette River. It's within the Portland Harbor. It spans about 3,000 feet of shoreline, and then you can see that it's not too wide. It ranges from about 70 feet to 100 feet, depending where you are. And the Willamette Cove today, it looks a lot different. As I was saying, the industrial activities all had pretty much died down by the 1970s. The majority, all the buildings were removed, but there is some remnant structures like concrete pads and other infrastructure that is on site. It's kind of scattered throughout the site. Mainly you can see the concrete pad on the east parcel, but if you did start looking, there is quite a bit of other infrastructure there. And you can see that the vegetation has reemerged, and we have some, pretty healthy trees. It looks pretty nice. It's looking a lot closer to Park Lake. Also, before I move that, sorry, I also wanted to mention that Metro purchased the property in, trying to recall, the 90s, and they purchased old parcels, and now we call it the Willamette Cove site, and they have plans for a park with a regional trail. So the reason we're talking about this today, because there is a problem at the Willamette Cove site. There's extensive contamination in the upland, the riverbank, and in water. And these are, not only is it contaminated, it's contaminated with contaminants that have very high toxicity, and they're spread throughout the site. So we're talking about dioxins, metals, PCBs, but there is also other contaminants. And again, I guess I already went into this, but it is on the Willamette River, and which leads to the next slide. So it's in the heart of the Portland Harbor, which is a Superfund. That Superfund work is overseen by EPA. This is their work is the in-water and the riverbank cleanup, and which sometimes gets confused with DEQ's responsibility, but in this case, and throughout the Portland Harbor, we're responsible for the upland cleanups when there is contamination that needs to be addressed. And the next slide kind of, oh, sorry, I forgot there was an animation there. But we had Portland Harbor, the Superfund shows the in-water, and then you can see the Willamette Cove there. That's very nice. The next figure also illustrates that the Superfund is the riverbank and the in-water, and when we talk about uplands, we're talking about top of bank and landward. So a lot of work has been done to date. Metro, the current property owner, and the Port of Portland, the former property owner of the central parcel, joined into a voluntary agreement with DEQ in 2000. There's been multiple phases of remedial investigation to better define the nature and extent of contamination. This information was used to do risk assessments. Humans and plants and animals use the site, and so a risk assessment is based on those uses and their presence. And also what we know about plans for future uses of the site. The site information is also used to do hotspots, to remove hotspots. A significant one was done in 2015 and 2016 period. While we removed some hotspots, there is contamination that still remains on the site, and that is what the proposed cleanup plan addresses. And that's kind of one thing I think there is sometimes some confusion that, there were these removal actions, and while we did reduce hotspots, we do have, there is contamination across the whole entire site that poses risk to humans and plants and animals. And these hotspot areas, well, hotspot areas are also present, and these hotspot areas present a very high risk. You can see in the figure at the top, there's a very small hotspot area that's left, and that's what we understand about the site that remains, that poses a risk to humans. Now, I'd like to point out that the risk-based screening levels for humans and ecology can be quite different because, well, we are different species, and for many of reasons, the ecology ones tend to be quite lower, and so there is contamination that may not be a hotspot for humans, but may be a hotspot for ecology. And when we're talking about dioxin, that is present throughout the site. Now, there's other contaminants where we still have hotspots. Sometimes we talk about dioxin hotspots and non-dioxin hotspots, and there is some other areas that are hotspots for other contaminants. So who's being exposed at the site? We talked about the plants and animals present, but the other people we consider, we just don't consider all people the same. We do know people use the site. I mean, it's a beautiful site. There's signage up there, but that doesn't necessarily keep people out. So we're talking about recreational users, we're talking about campers, and then we also think about future users, and so the site plans to be a park. So again, we're thinking about recreational users, the walkers, the cyclists, the bird watchers, campers, and then future construction workers. Okay. And when we talk about risk assessment, is quite complicated. We could spend hours talking about it, but risk is pretty much the toxicity of the contamination, and humans or plants and animals being exposed to it. So if you either remove the toxicity or the exposure, then you remove the risk. So in this case, the entire uplands of the Willamette Cove has soil contamination. So what we call so there's unacceptable risk. And then some of these, again, hotspot areas present a very high risk. And because these conditions are present, there is a cleanup is necessary. to protect human health and the environment. So how do we get to a cleanup plan? I was talking about we've done remedial investigations, we've done removal actions, we've done risk assessments, and defining, and so we've defined kind of the nature and extent of contamination that remains at the site. So the Port and Metro were asked to propose some remedial options. We start with a very broad range, and they deduce that into a feasibility study, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And these remedial technologies are traditional and non-traditional. Just a moment. So when we talk about traditional methods, this is kind of like your dig and haul excavation and removal options, and you take it off site. Other traditional kind of construction-based methods are capping. And capping can be just flat out capping the whole site, or you can consolidate it and put a cap over it. Other options that we're looking into were chemical treatment, bioremediation, thermal remediation, you know, all the latest technologies that had merit were looked at during the feasibility study stages. And I'd like to point out there was 2 feasibility studies. There was one produced in 2017 based on DEQ comments and EPA comments and tribal representative comments. It was revised, and the final feasibility study was completed in April 2019. So the contaminants at the site, when you're looking at the remedial technologies to consider, you also have to look at what the site conditions are, and in this case, there was multiple contaminants, kind of what we call persistent contaminants, such as dioxins, metals, and PCBs, across the whole entire site. And they're persistent, we call them persistent because they are really hard to treat. So there's not a lot of treatment methods out there. And these persistent contaminants also tend to be very, have a higher toxicity. So the cleanup standards tend to be low, no leaf or dioxins. So that's why you see these kind of maps with dioxins exceeding across the whole entire site. And the other challenges and considerations are when you're choosing a method is, you know, not just, you know, will the method work? It's also how will it impact the community? So if you're talking about truckloads leaving a site, like thousands of truckloads, sorry, my earplug just came out, one moment. So, you know, that has its own impact, not just to the immediate community, but the larger community and where those trucks are going. So once you have your broad range of technologies to consider, there's also the regulatory side. And the number one criteria that we require, it's a pass and fail, is will it be protected? Will it meet your remedial goals? Will it be protected for human health and the environment? So when we talk about that it's hard to treat these persistent contaminants with bioremediation and some of the chemical treatment and site-wide, you know, there's those challenges, and all those did not pass the pass-fail criteria, at least current technology that's out there. Once you get it past that gate, we have in our regulatory framework what we call the balancing factors, and these are what we're showing here on the figure. It's will it be effective? Can we implement it? Are it easily implementable, or is it hard to implement? Is there a risk to that, whether it's to the environment or workers? Is it reliable long term? Maybe it works for 1 week, but we want something that works for years. And then cost does come on into this. So we call them the 5 balancing factors. And that's how DEQ makes its decision. And what we do is take the remedial alternatives that were carried forward, we compare them to each other, and then essentially they get ranked against each other. So in this case, a hybrid approach that the port and metro proposed outranks the other alternatives, and it is a hybrid approach. And it will protect future recreational park users, construction workers, campers, and plants and animals. And this hybrid approach is, I also call it like a tiered approach, because first of all, we're going to remove hotspots that remain for human health. And there's an asterisk there, which I'll explain later, but it's not just human health. There will also be eco hotspots that go off-site. Now, once we remove the hotspots, there's going to be a good portion of the site will remain that still contains contamination that's either or both above human health risk and eco risk. So everything that's above human health risk would be consolidated to one area we're calling the consolidation area. That will also include eco risk as well, particularly eco hotspots that weren't already taken off-site. And then what would remain after you consolidate that area, and you would cap it with an engineered cap, you have these areas that kind of have a lower level risk to ecology, or if any risk that remains, and that would be a topsoil cover. And since contamination remains on site, there would be long-term monitoring and maintenance. So this is kind of the cleanup concept and illustration. We see the areas that are going to be removed. You can see that it's bigger than a little circle for human health because this also includes the ecological non-dioxin hotspots. And then you see a consolidation area, and then the other colors kind of representing the rest of the site would be covered. And the other part of this plan is that we would try to preserve the native trees to the extent possible while achieving the protectiveness that we need.
Sorry.
So when we talk about hotspot removals, again, we're talking about that human health hotspots, and then we're also talking, like I just said, about the ecological non-dioxin furan hotspots. And these are metals. Mercury is one of the metals. It's very toxic to ecological life. And I guess what's not really said here also is if we find additional human health hotspots, there's going to be pre-remedial design sampling. I'll go into that later. But if we do find additional contamination, it will still follow this plan. If it exceeds human health hotspots, it'll go off-site. That's the #1 priority. So this is kind of tier 1. This is what happens first. So rest of the site would still have contamination. Pretty much rest of the site would be excavated, and the depth will vary depending on the contamination, the areas, and the contamination there. And it would be consolidated to one area. One benefit about that is you don't leave contamination spread throughout the site. So you're kind of digging it up and putting it in one area. And this will include rest of the human health risk and a majority of the ecological risk. And this is going to be a heavily engineered cap. Right now we're calling for a minimum 3 feet thickness. It would need to be reinforced, so probably some type of rock. And then soil could be used at the top to promote plant growth. It will need to be tailored to fit into park features, or it needs to look like a park to the extent possible. And at the same time, park features could be used as kind of covered areas. So you could maybe, this is all hypothetical, but you could use maybe the consolidation area and build a viewing platform. That's not up to DEQ, but if that fits into Metro's plans, that's something that can be done. And I think importantly, what people do have concerns about is the long-term resiliency. We are leaving not hotspots on site, but human health hotspots, but what we are leaving on site does pose some human health risk. But it'll be this 3-foot minimum barrier. It'll be designed to withstand not just current storms, but expected increased storms with intensity, increased floods, seismic considerations. And so following all of those activities, we have kind of the final tier. So we'll be doing a soil cover in those areas. At minimum, there'll be 1 foot of topsoil placed across the site just for plant growth. Now, if there's other areas that have ecological risks, the thickness would be based on the risk left for plants and animals. And here I try to create an animation. We'll see how this goes to kind of show this concept. So here we have the removal areas that go off-site, and they fade away. Then we start excavating and creating a consolidated area. And as we continue to excavate the consolidation area, it'll grow. Here we have it growing. And so with that, the consolidation area will have size limits too. It's not just about having consolidation area and we'll put everything that's left on site will go in this consolidation area. There will be size constraints. And I'll talk more about the consolidation area location and shape in the next slide. And then once that's done, we're going to want to make it look like a park. We can make it green. It's just whatever fits into Metro's park plans. Add more vegetation. So make it look like a really nice place that you want to, people want to be. So in the next slide, I'm trying to illustrate that, right now it's on a figure, it's just shown as a rectangle. Well, the consolidation area is not going to be a rectangle. It's not going to be a pyramid. It could be many shapes and sizes. So, I mean, it could be a circle. It could be long and skinny, maybe shaped into certain areas of the site. And then also, it doesn't have to be on the east parcel. I mean, that's still to be determined in remedial design. So after D2 selects a remedy, we'd go into remedial design. And an important component of this remedy is that there will be remedial design sampling, and it'll be site-wide, it'll be comprehensive. We've done a lot of sampling in the past, but we've done removal actions, but it's kind of been done in series of different methods. So we'll kind of do it all in similar methods, and why we do this is also to better refine the areas, provide better resolution of the extent of contamination and the volumes. And we want to know the volumes because we want to know how much we're taking off-site. We need to design a consolidation area. You need to know all of that information up front to the extent that you can. And this data that you will get from remedial design sampling will help engineers design the consolidation area. And that's when the location and the shape will be decided. There'll be other considerations we'll also have to take into account is one, size constraint. DEQ is going to place limits on the size of it. There's going to be a riverbank cleanup, and we don't know exactly what that looks like, but we are expecting that the riverbank will be potentially set back in areas. There's definitely steepened areas that have contamination, and there'll be a cleanup. So we're going to have to fit into that cleanup as well. And then the consolidation area will be designed to fit in the park infrastructure, and again, for long-term resiliency, for storms, flood, seismic events. And then there will also be a geotechnical analysis. We have lots of features around the site. We have railroad tracks. We have a riverbank. So all type of that analysis will take place as part of this remedial design. So that's a lot of information, but I just want to highlight some things that we're doing that is essentially restoring the site to be protective. And we're doing an excavation. We're removing the sources, particularly the human health hotspots. And I say more as in ecological hotspots will also be taken off site, particularly the metal hotspots. The remaining risk will be removed for where it is and consolidated, and eco risk will be excavated and consolidated to one portion of the site, or a focus, I don't know, a focused area of the site. And what we have left is, we can't just leave it uncapped. So what we're also going to do is create barriers. We're going to put caps and covers down to remove the exposure. And what this does is protect, in the future, any humans that come on site, whether they're daily runners, campers, and folks doing construction work. And don't forget about the plants and animals. So where we are in the cleanup process, Port of Portland and Metro submitted a feasibility study in 2019. You can see that as the first thing in the timeline. DEQ completed a staff report. We took all the information the port provided and just all the information that we have. Luckily, we've worked pretty collaboratively with the Port of Portland over the years and have had multiple meetings and reports, so we were pretty much on the same page when it was time to come up with a cleanup option and propose one. The DEQ produced this staff report that summarizes the cleanup action, but it also is the basis for our cleanup action. It is the justification why we're proposing what we are. It is maybe 30, 40 pages long, so most people don't want to read through it, but if you do, I can let you know where to find it. So right now, we are in the public comment period. It started in March. Right up front, we've committed to 60 days. Because of the current state of affairs with COVID, we extended that 2020. We definitely want people to remain social distancing. So, this is the time we want to hear from you. This is how we get to understand what the community wants. This is a very important element of the cleanup process. So I'll give you some avenues to provide comments. Feel free to let me know what you like, but also let us know what you're concerned about. And once the closing on the public comment period closes, DEQ reviews the comments, and we definitely consider them. We actually, if it's related to the cleanup, we'll write up a response, and that response will be included in DEQ's what we call the record of decision. We were hoping for this to happen in the summer. We'll see how this goes with social distancing and whatnot. So after we have a record of decision, we start into remedial design. The Port of Portland and Metro will start developing work plans. DEQ will be providing input and eventually approval to go implement those work plans. And like I talked about, a big component of it will be first collecting a good amount of data, and then they'll go into the actual engineering design. And after that, we do what we call remedial action. We'll implement the cleanup. And, it wasn't just DEQ and the Port of Portland and Metro. We've had many partners in this. Oregon Health Authority has helped us with getting talking to the community about contaminants at the site and letting them know that it is harmful. There is current risk at the site. The Portland Harbor Community Coalition has also helped with this, and the CAG, and importantly, really helping us out with the outreach. Particularly in the last year, they've put a lot of work into this. So thank you, guys. So more information. If you still want to go get more information, after this presentation, there's this link. We'll provide this presentation, but if you want to take a screenshot or jot this down, or we can put it in the download section, there is a DEQ Willamette Cove Upland's website that has fact sheets, executive summaries, it has public notices in 4 different languages, and then it also has a summary, how to comment, a link to where you can comment, and if you scroll down to the bottom, there is DEQ staff report and the feasibility study. There's also more information we also have an environmental cleanup site information database, and we have it for every site, and this site ID is 2066. And then you can contact me directly. I mean, this is my work phone number that's shown and my email address. While we did set up another email address for comments, that doesn't mean you can't send comments to me directly. It was just so my inbox wouldn't get filled up. So right now we're about 2.5 months into public comment. Right now it ends at June 30th. I just talked about kind of the 3 ways to submit comments. You can also mail me, so that my mail address is listed on the DEQ website. And then there's these public meetings. Unfortunately, we were planning on doing these more in person. So if you have a comment that you want to submit now, I mean, I would recommend actually just sending it directly to this website. But if you just want to do Q&A, I mean, please insert some questions that we can answer. And I didn't edit this completely because you'll just have to pretend that there's information in the back of the room. But we definitely can get you copies of this presentation. Any questions?